Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ask Dr. Be Good show, the show where we look at the politics, the pedagogy, the practice of public education. And why do we do this? We do this to create our pub ed army, our advocates who understand the need to make sure that our pub ed students get the adequate resources and funding from our legislators that they need to really grow up and become very strong tax-paying citizens. And so our future rests in their hands, and we want to make sure their current reality prepares them for that future. Now, you'll notice my background's a little bit different today, and that is because I am in Lubbock. I am testing the state test for some of our virtual academy students. Because we have students all over the state, there weren't enough people, and you had to have certain certifications to be able to say test or to proctor it, I guess. And so I offered to proctor it in this hometown of Lubbock, where my brother and his family lives. So I get to have dinner with them, and it's a nice 2-for-1. I'm helping the schools, I'm helping students, and I get to see my brother. So interesting things going on in public education as always, but I always like to start off with a speaker to bring us some learning. You know, I am a teacher by trade and by nature, and I love sharing things that will keep our families happy and safe and secure. And so I ran across an email from the North Texas Poison Center, and I thought I would bring on a spokesperson from there. And so Cristina Holloway has graciously said that she would join us. So Cristina, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing well. Excited to be on here to share what it is that we're doing as far as public education in regards to poison prevention and what we've seen the past year or so.
Yeah, people have interesting stories from the different agencies we bring on. First, tell a little.
So a little bit about myself and what the Poison Center does. My name is Cristina Holloway. I'm the Public Health Education Manager at the North Texas Poison Center. We're located in Dallas, Texas. And a big part of what we do is educating the public on poison prevention, right? So not only what we can do and the steps we can take to prevent poisonings from happening in our own lives, but also the very important thing, which is knowing what to do if something does happen, right? And knowing where to call and where to seek help. So that is essentially what my role is at the Poison Center. And then, of course, we do serve as a 24-hour call center, 24/7 call center for those poison emergencies for the public.
So you're affiliated or associated with Parkland Hospital?
Yes. So Parkland Hospital is our host institution. It's kind of interesting how poison centers work. There's 55 poison centers nationwide, 6 here in Texas. And so we act as regional poison centers, and we're all located at some type of typically a public hospital or even sometimes a university. So here in Dallas, we're located at Parkland Hospital.
Well, thank you for that. So let's start off with, what did the COVID year do to your center?
Yeah, so some of it, I'd like to say surprisingly, but it really makes sense, As far as poisonings were concerned, we saw actually some big changes in the data and in the types of calls that were coming into the Poison Center. We saw pretty significant increases in calls coming in related to disinfectants, hand sanitizers, cleaning products, right? Which makes sense. We are all using these products more than ever before, right? I'm sure we've never cleaned and disinfected and sanitized so much in our lives. And that means that, it's easier access to those things in our homes. The vast majority of poisonings do occur in the home, and oftentimes involving children, right? Where they're getting their hands on something that they may not be aware of that could be dangerous for them. And so we did see those increases shortly after the pandemic started back in March 2020, and saw those increases actually throughout the year. We did see a kind of a decrease in those towards the end of 2020. However, there is still an increase with those types of calls.
Now, have things settled down now that school's opened up? More kids are at school, less kids staying at home. Have things settled down? What kind of change did you see?
Right. That's a great question. It's hard for me to really draw those conclusions just based on our data alone. As I mentioned, we did see, like, once it got to summer of 2020 and then into the fall of 2020, we saw those numbers stabilize a little bit more, but still increased compared to years past. So now that kiddos are back in school, you know, there's a little bit more of that normalcy. Not everyone's stuck at home. You know, poison centers get calls each and every day, regardless of where we are, right? As far as working from home, doing school from home, or whether we're actually going outside of our homes. So it's hard for us to really say that. We continue to get calls regardless, right? So that one's kind of a tough one.
So, okay, but it does make perfect sense that you had an increase in the hand sanitizer, maybe kids drinking it, little toddlers, things like that. What was there any misuse of the hand sanitizer? Where it made kids? I'm visualizing some of that smellier stuff that some of our adolescent kids might have thought it would be fun to sniff it, stuff like that.
Yeah, so there were various issues that we saw. You know, as we all remember back to the beginning of the pandemic, how difficult it was to find, you know, those products and those sanitizing products. And that really drove a lot of companies and other manufacturers who normally don't, you know, manufacture that type of product to create it. And so we were seeing that sometimes sanitizers were being packaged in kind of like water bottles, or packaging that looked like children's you know, pouches, things like that. And so the FDA did put out several warnings in relation to the type of packaging that was being used, just to warn consumers, right? Be aware that sometimes that sanitizer might not look like sanitizer. And of course, that could be especially confusing to small children, right? They see something that looks like that juice pouch, or that, you know, fruit blend that they're used to, and in reality, it's hand sanitizer. So that was certainly a concern, yes.
And so let's then go to the parent and educator training. So sort of think of it in two ways. What trainings, resources do you have for parents versus schools?
Sure. So for parents specifically, we do offer a presentation. It's called Poisons in the Home. And so this is a presentation that we offered pre-pandemic, but now we're continuing to offer it. And of course, we're including some information that is pandemic specific, some of those things that we have seen over the past few years that are relevant to the parents now, right, with this kind of new normal. So that is actually about an hour presentation. It's incredibly informative. It tells them a little bit of background on the poison centers, how we work, how we're there to assist them, when to call a poison center, but then also preventative measures that they can take in their homes to hopefully prevent those things from happening in the first place. The presentation also goes over a little bit of bites and stings. So the typical spiders and things like that we see here in Texas, which is usually well received. People like to hear about those fun things like that. And it's interesting because a lot of times people don't consider those to be poisons, right? Or they wouldn't think, oh, I could call the poison center if my child or family member is stung or bitten by, you know, an animal. And so that is the presentation that we offer. As I mentioned, it's about an hour in length, and we do offer it in English and in Spanish. Unfortunately, at this time, we're not able to go out into the community or out into schools to parent groups as we typically have in the past. But we are offering all of our presentations both virtually on an online platform where we're live and we're presenting, but we also have it on demand. So it's a pre-recorded presentation that we can share the link to so that they can watch it on their own time. You know, they can pause it, stop it, and share it that way.
We'll put the link in the comment section so that that's there. That's a good point. When do you see yourselves being able to go into the community again?
So at this point, we are not sure because we are under the umbrella of Parkland Hospital. We are waiting for the go-ahead from our institution to let us know. So for the most part, they follow CDC guidelines. So it's more than likely when, you know, CDC says it's safe for that type of activity is when we'll return.
And now let's talk about trainings for schools. And I'm sure talk about the spectrum, because there's got to be a spectrum, right? What do you do for the
Yeah, when you say schools, I mean, we could be talking about, you know, pre-K, or we could be talking about seniors in high school. So yes, absolutely. We have a variety of different programs. I'll just give you a quick little overview of each one. For our youngest elementary students, we have a program called Be Poison Safe. It's a 30-minute program. It's about all the attention that they can typically give us. And it just goes over the very basics of, you know, poison education with them, what poisons are, where we find them, what should we do if we come across a poison, right? And then we tell them all about the poison help number and how it can be called if a poisoning does occur. Then for older elementary students, we have one called OTC medication safety. Because typically around 10, 11 years old is where kids start to take on that responsibility of giving themselves their medicine, or sometimes the parents will allow them. And so we want to ensure that when they start to take medicines by themselves, they know how to do so safely. And so it goes over the differences of over-the-counter versus prescription medicines, the dangers that can come with both of those, and then how to read the medicine label so that you know exactly what you're doing. So that's the elementary programs. For middle school and high school, we offer two programs. The main one is our drug education program. It has kind of three buckets that fall underneath it. It covers prescription drugs, alcohol and tobacco, and synthetic drugs. That one has been very, very popular. We've had that program for, oh gosh, maybe 3 years now. And it's a lot of information really piled into one presentation. And it's about 45 minutes to an hour long. And then branching off of that, we created a vaping education presentation. So it really just focuses in on vape products and what, you know, teens should really be aware of, as far as, you know, what's in the liquid, what's in the vapor, really what they're exposing their bodies to there from a very factual perspective. So that's also been a really popular presentation, especially with the issues and the illnesses that we saw here in Texas and nationwide just about 2 years ago now. I know it seems like it was last year, but it wasn't. It's been a few years. So talking about the dangers of vape use. And that one is a little bit shorter. It's about 30 minutes in length.
Are people surprised that the Poison Center has training on substance abuse and vaping? Because you caught me a little bit off guard. I went, oh,
right. I didn't. Yeah, right. You're probably like, oh, I didn't really think about that as being a poison. And yes, that's kind of a lot of the times the reaction that we'll get. And you know, even when we go into, like, let's say I go into a high school classroom and I tell them, hey, I'm here with the Poison Center. I want to tell you a little bit about what we do. And, you know, we're going to talk about drugs today. And they're like, what? And so I always like to explain, you know, what a poison is, how drugs fit into that category, and why specifically for this audience, right, these high schoolers, why did I pick drugs of all the poisons to talk about? And so a lot of what we do, a lot of our presentations are very much data driven, right? So it depends what calls we get from that demographic, then what we're going to teach about. And so unfortunately, for the middle school to high school age, drugs and those different substances are what we are receiving calls on. And so that is kind of where we base that. And that's where we pulled those three categories of the prescription drugs, alcohol, tobacco, and synthetic. Because, you think about alcohol and tobacco, and, education has been around forever. You'd think that we know everything there is to know. We don't need to talk about it more. But the Poison Center continues to receive calls involving those substances. And so that's why we continue to teach on it.
It makes perfect sense. I mean, if you asked anybody, is vaping a poison? In the end, they would probably go, well, yes. I hadn't thought of it that way. Or is heroin a poison? I guess it, but that's not the first place. But that's fascinating. That's good.
It's interesting because the world of the poison world and the world of toxicology is so vast, right? You can talk about snakes one day, and then you're talking about opioids the next day. It's kind of crazy, but that's something that I really enjoy about this field, is that there's so many different things to talk about. Sometimes it can surprise people, what can be toxic or harmful for their body, and there's lots of teaching to do, certainly.
Right. Well, I'm going to keep your number handy. We have a cottage on the lake, and I hear that there's water moccasins and
I'm sure
out there. And I also became a recent beekeeper. I now have some hives, and I got my first bee sting on Sunday, and so far, not too bad of a reaction, but I hope that I don't have to call you, but it's good to know you.
Certainly hope not, but it is a good number to have just in case, Now, that's what I like to tell people. It's, nobody ever plans to call the poison helpline, but it's important to know it if you need it. So.
Well, we sure thank you for coming on today and sharing with us, really more than what I even thought you did. And so the link will help us get to that information. I know that my counselors have your information already, and we're going to be presenting that to kids. And we're K-12, so everybody will get a dose. But thank you. And my hope always is that you get less calls, right?
Exactly.
That's a good way to say it. But thank you again.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. Hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too. And let's not forget that today is Mother's Day. And so I hope that you brought her favorite poison, maybe some nice perfume, or her favorite beverage. I don't know. Some moms like wine, some moms like mimosas. Whatever it is, make sure that you did something or do something nice for mom today. And speaking of doing nice things, and one of the things I forgot to do was bring my contacts from home. I was in a hurry when I left to come to Lubbock, so I'm going to have to suffer through using my glasses, so pardon me for that. But we have President Biden, who has an ambitious birth to college education plan as a way to compete with the rest of the world. That's an interesting way of putting that. Okay, so what he would like to do is add 2 years of, in essence, 4 years, 2 years at the beginning of school and 2 years after kids graduate. So let's talk a little bit about that and what people think about that. So it's called the American Family Plan, and it is his contention that we need to add the 4 additional years of public education, 2 in preschool and 2 in community college, to compete with the rest of the world in the 21st century. The research shows that when a young child goes to school, not daycare, but preschool. They're 4 more likely to graduate from high school and go to college. Okay, and remember, he has easy access. His first lady, his wife, is a college professor, right? So he would know these things. The president didn't report whether he had met his goal for the 100 days, but some people say he has, some people say he hasn't. But there are a lot of people who have liked what they've heard as far as his plans. Now, paying for it, that's one of those things that all of us are curious about. So his concern is that not all schools have reopened yet. Other countries reopened, private and religious schools opened. Science has shown us for months that schools are safe. And so, he would like to see all schools reopen, even if it's not every day. He has said that. In his 1.8 trillion American Family Plan, which is one of the most ambitious domestic policy plans since LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society, it seeks to address an array of longstanding challenges from childcare to teacher shortages. But of course, we've got people already mobilizing against the first phase of the infrastructure. So we'll see how much gets accomplished and passed. Not all Democrats are for it. So he has to, Joe Biden has to convince even his own party that, for example, extending the child tax credit through 2025 is a good idea. He wants to use the American Rescue Plan to increase the credit to as much as $3,600 a year, and that families would begin getting this money monthly in July. And there are Democrats who would like to push forward with the legislation that would make this credit permanent, so that it could not be undone if the Republicans come in. And again, there's that politics and pub ed that we're always looking at and understanding that it influences our schools, it influences our families. So we really have many reasons to keep track of what's going on, right? Some people, Rosa DeLauro, which is a Democrat from Connecticut, feels like this is a lifeline to the middle class, says that despite the administration's concern over the proposal's cost, we believe that we will be able to square those numbers. The president intends to pay for his plan by raising taxes on the wealthiest Americans to 39.6% and ending capital gain tax breaks, reforms that are estimated to bring in $1.5 trillion over the next 10 years. So, and I think I remember hearing that the wealthiest Americans are those that are bringing in $400,000 a year or more. So most of us don't have to worry about that tax increase, right? So now what does he want to do with childcare infrastructure? So there's more agreements among the Democrats over his early childhood proposals, which include $200 billion of free universal preschool, $225 billion to expand and improve childcare, and permanently extend a high tax credit for childcare expenses. Employees in public-funded pre-Ks, Head Starts, and childcare programs would earn at least $15 an hour, while early educators with teaching credentials would earn the same as kindergarten teachers in public schools. Because a lot of times, teachers who are teaching 3- and 4-year-olds do not make as much money as teachers teaching 5-year-olds and up. And yet, the job that those early childhood educators are doing with our 3- and 4-year-olds is crucial many times to their literacy. And so we need to start thinking of those teachers with a little bit more respect. And if it comes through the pocketbook, I'm sure they'd appreciate it. A separate 10-year, $700 billion Universal Child Care and Early Learning Act would provide free, high-quality child care and early learning programs for families earning less than $53,000 a year or less. I wonder how they come up with $53,000 a year. We talk about crumbling infrastructure when we talk about roads and bridges. Senate Education Chair Patty Murray of Washington said Tuesday, but we really never had the child care infrastructure in this country in the first place. And that's very true. I don't know how many of you know that right now, for you to be able to have free pre-K, your child must either be second language or developmentally delayed in a sense. They can't be on grade level, so to speak. So they're really saving those pre-K spots for the neediest, instructionally neediest kids. But what Joe Biden would like to do is to say that all kids can have pre-K so that everybody is getting the early childhood literacy universally, everybody. So ranking member Richard Burr, a Republican, said that he doesn't want to see a preschool system controlled by public school. Parent choice and flexibility is paramount. So, so I don't know. And again, I think that hurts at the middle class. They don't oftentimes have the money to pay for an early childhood program as opposed to a daycare. Daycares are expensive enough, but if you try to put the kids in a private early childhood school, it's going to cost you even more money. And many of our really poorest families, of course, can't afford that. So we're trying to level the playing field here, right? Be equitable to more than just our very neediest families. Some early learning advocates think the president's plan doesn't go far enough. And there's that politic thing back and forth, right? In the broadest strokes, it prioritizes the neediest, and there are -0 things to say about that, said Chris Swanson, an associate research scientist at Johns Hopkins University. But what we've seen with the pandemic is that a completely unforeseen disruption in earnings can be catastrophic. Our middle class often doesn't have the great reserves, which is, like I said. And so really we need to stop thinking of early childhood in school as something that has to be paid for. Because our kids won't get it, especially now that we've had COVID and so many families were impacted by losing their jobs and so forth. What's happening in K-12 and higher ed? Well, in K-12, Biden would spend $9 billion to reduce teacher shortages by offering $8,000 scholarships to future teachers and helping educators earn additional credentials in high demand areas like special ed. I remember a time, I gotta tell you, I remember a time when we did not have problems finding special ed teachers. But in the last couple of years, we've not only had trouble finding them, but we have to pay them a stipend, much like a bilingual teacher, to keep them. And so being able to offer scholarships to future teachers, especially in high need teaching areas, is very smart. The plan would support teacher residencies and grow your own models that encourage high school students to pursue teaching and stay in their communities. So that would be doubly good. And to give you sort of a quick example of that, I was a longtime bilingual teacher, and we would oftentimes look for trainings of success stories with bilingual students. And this was back, gosh, in the 90s. And bilingual education started really in the late 70s, early 80s. And I started at being a teacher in 86. So by the 90s, we've been doing it a while, but still needing to get better at it. And so we looked to other districts that were also working with bilingual students to say, are you being more successful than we are? And if you are, how is it that you are being more successful? And we looked down at the Valley in South Texas, and they were having astronomical success with those bilingual kids. And we studied that. And I was getting my bilingual master's at the time, so of course that was part of my research. And come to find out, in the Valley, most of the, first of all, there were several things going on. First of all, most of the kids in those schools were Hispanic. Most of the teachers in those schools were also Hispanic. And so they were being taught by teachers who many times had had second language issues themselves, and were able to build that relationship with them, that cultural connection with them. And the kids had, because if you can reach them, you can teach them, the kids connected with their teachers in a much quicker, deeper way. They were able to get further in their learning of English and keeping their Spanish, by the way, because that's the point of the bilingual program, and actually be more successful. But here's the interesting part. When we got training from people in that area, we quickly learned that we could never reproduce it, because we didn't have mostly, especially where I was in Plano, we didn't have mostly Hispanic kids. For example, in my middle school program, I had Hispanic kids, I had Taiwanese, German, Pakistani, and so forth. And then they were being taught by oftentimes teachers who didn't look like them. And so you just couldn't reproduce that program other places. And so my point is, working with our early childhood grades and making sure that we grow our own and get our own high schoolers to want to be teachers and then want to be teachers in their own communities. If we could have that happen, that would be, just phenomenal for the kids. So thank you for letting me digress. That was a walk down memory lane. So Joshua Starr, who is CEO of the PDK International, that's a very well-known and well-regarded professional organization for educators, said that all of the elements are needed, but he wonders how equipped states are and school districts are to manage all of this new funding while addressing competing priorities. And that's as a superintendent, I understand that statement. School districts are not drinking from a fire hose when it comes to dollars. Folks, I think I mentioned last week that my school district with 1,600 kids got $4 million plus. Dallas ISD got $543 million. That's $500 million. And the responsibility around spending it correctly, so it doesn't trigger audits and repayments and so forth. It's a huge responsibility. So I really connected with this statement. Where is the capacity? How do you even get this stuff on a school board agenda? It's a lot of work. It's lovely to think of this much money hitting districts, but goodness gracious, it is a fire hose of an opportunity. So what's happening in higher education? Biden proposes to spend $109 billion to cover 2 years of community college, similar to the America's College Promise Act. There are some people, though, who, for example, the president of the conservative Thomas B. Fordham Institute is not thinking this is a good idea. He thinks it's a terrible idea to make community college free, but not the first 2 years of a 4-year university, given that students, especially low income and students of color, tend to do better at 4-year schools. Now, I'd love to know what research he has that's he's working from on that, because I've never heard that. That doesn't mean it's not true. I've just never read that. The last thing we want to do is to encourage students to undermatch and choose institutions that are less capable of giving them support and the challenges they need and deserve. So, interesting points. Other key elements in Biden's proposal include $225 billion over 10 years for 12 weeks of paid family leave, $25 billion for a permanent debit card program to provide low-income children with meals when schools are closed during the summer. $17 billion to expand free school meals to all students at high poverty schools. Permanently extend the increased earned income tax credit that was included in the American Rescue Plan, and a $1,400 increase in the Pell Grants. So those are really nice proposals, right? They would solve a lot of problems. So let's question all of this. Biden's early priorities included getting funds to districts to support reopening, yes. Less than 2 months after taking office, Biden signed a sweeping relief package, about the $122 billion for the K-12, along with another $3 billion for special ed. The law requires states and districts to implement summer and after-school programs to address learning loss, and includes almost $40 billion for childcare, over $7 billion to improve students' at-home internet access, and $800 million specifically for homeless students. Some have questioned the size of the plan. Rick Hess, Director of Education Policy at the Conservative American Enterprise System, said the amount was unhinged from any rational assessment of what's needed. Future Ed, a Georgetown University think tank, wonders whether there will be friction between those who want state leaders to direct funds towards teacher raises and those who argue that it should be used for immediate school use of like tutoring and curriculum improvement. The Education Department is going to have to work really hard to support districts in making effective use of the federal funding windfall. But Haidt said the funding allowed educators to plan for recovery and provided some daylight at the end of a very dark tunnel. So credibility and trust. Let's see. State and district leaders aren't the only ones who have regained some confidence in the White House. In a March National Parents Union poll, 70% of parents said they approve of how Biden has responded to the crisis, and 64% approve of his push to reopen schools. So let's see, the public health response is 70% approval. The economic recovery from COVID-19, 67% approval. The reopening of public schools for in-person learning, 64%. So those are pretty strong. And all the disapprove were under 26%. But that doesn't mean everyone's on board, right? The parents who have been hurt are the parents who wanted schools to be reopened, but there's still a lot of kids who are still missing, or still either sitting at home or missing. We have both of that going on, said Annette Anderson from Johns Hopkins. According to the department's reopening data, 39% of fourth graders and 29% of eighth graders attend school in person, but students of color are far more likely to be learning at home. In fourth grade, 52% of white students attend school in person compared to 30% of Black, 32% of Hispanic, and only 15% of Asian students. The pattern is similar in eighth grade. A recent analysis showed that politics, school policies, and local COVID-19 outbreaks all influence parents' decisions to send their children back to school. Another paper on the same topic confirmed what Haidt said he sees in his own district. The more children we bring back, the more families we want who will want to come back. Credibility and trust creates more credibility and trust. But Anderson noted that concerns relating to the pandemic, such as bullying and previous instances where teachers discriminated against their children, factor into the decision as well. Parents are in the driver's seat in education in a way that they've not been before. And we do have the pandemic to thank for that, right? They know how to use their computers better. They actually hearing what's going on in school and in class, right? So it's been, I think it was healthy for parents to have the opportunity. It was a heck of a way to learn it, right? But, and so that is what's going on with our politics in pub ed, and it's just all politics, right? We have the push and shove from both sides, and And we can only hope that they end up thinking about the children and putting the children first. And you're going to help them with that. Remember, you're going to help them by making sure that they hear your voice and your thoughts around what you just heard. What you might want to do is, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you might want to send your legislators and congresspeople an email and saying that you approve or do not approve of the early childhood plans, or the, you know, whatever sort of stayed with you. They need to hear from you. And maybe we should think of COVID as that blessing of getting you all more pub ed advocates and learning to become better pub ed advocates. So write yourselves a note, put it in a text to yourself. You know, I do that now. If I want to remember something, I text myself and say, remember to email my legislators and my congresspeople about the Biden pub ed plan. Okay. So what else is going on besides the politics in behind the federal funds? Well, we're going to sort of walk across the country and see what's happening in some other states. Because sometimes we get tunnel vision and we only hear about what's happening in our state, or sometimes even just our city, right? And so let's broaden your horizons a little bit. Beyond the new federal funding, here are some updates from across the country about how states and school systems are confronting the challenges posed by the coronavirus emergency and working to preserve student learning and getting out of that COVID gap, right? So first, in Kentucky, districts gauge family and student interest in supplemental do-over school year. Recently, Senate Bill 128, also known as the Red Shirt Bill, would allow public school students enrolled in Kentucky to request to use the upcoming 21-22 school year as a supplemental year focused on retaking and mastering already completed coursework. The legislation necessitates that each district's Board of Education would need to approve the bill, and the board would evaluate applications from those who would wish for a supplemental year. Families would need to submit their request by May 1st, and the board would have until June 1 to approve or reject them. So, and what some of you don't remember or have forgotten is that in theory, you can only stay in school till you're 19, unless you're special ed, and then it's older. But what I'm hearing here is that if they gave some kids a supplemental year focused on retaking and mastering already completed coursework, I guess they would get to stay in school another year, but I'm wondering if that would be to get to do better on their college application test. I don't have enough information, but that's sort of interesting. In Massachusetts, state amends graduation requirement for class of 2022, excluding the MCAS test. So the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has approved modifications to competency requirements for next year's graduating class. The class of 2022 will not be required to take and pass the MCAS exams to graduate. The move follows 2 years of graduation requirements being suspended due to the pandemic and represents a data point in a continued national discussion about the role of high stakes linked to test performance. And that is true. In Texas, this second year, we do have to give the state test. Matter of fact, that's why I'm here in Lubbock right now. But it's only going to be to look at kid performance. It's not going to affect a school or a school district. And you all have heard me say that we really should think about encouraging our legislators to let us keep that assessment model. Number 3, Texas. Dallas Chamber endorses using assessment data to accelerate learning. So the Dallas Regional Chamber of Commerce penned a compelling statement in support of the state's administration of STAR assessment, saying understanding the impact on learning, while challenging, is a necessary step towards accelerating academic recovery and preparing all students for college and career success. The Dallas Chamber cites the use of student assessment data to guide critical investments and improvements across Dallas public schools for over a decade. It also urges school districts and state leaders to stand by the data-driven approach through the pandemic recovery. And again, I think they're endorsing what I just said, and that is, continue to use it to help us know how to help kids. Number 4, Florida Commissioner, Commissioner urges districts to make masks voluntary next year. It's interesting what's important to different states, right? Florida Education Commissioner Richard Corcoran has sent a request to each superintendent in the state asking the school districts to make mandatory face mask policies voluntary next year. So let me reread that because I don't think they wrote that well. So what they're asking districts to do is to change their mandatory face mask policies to voluntary next year. The data show us that districts' face covering policies do not impact the spread of the virus. He also said that those policies inhibit peer-to-peer learning in the classroom, although not everybody agrees with that. And so the Marion County Public School spokesman said the face covering resolution will remain in place if safe social distancing is not possible, while a spokesman for Seminole County Public Schools committed to district leaders discussing the memo further. So, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia Mayor centers education investments in COVID recovery. The Mayor, Kim Kenney, is spotlighting education funding and his plans for the city's pandemic recovery, detailing a long list of investments in the city school in a speech unveiling his $5.2 billion school budget proposal. He pledges to invest a scholarship program for underrepresented youth, to attend college tuition-free, expand community schools, and bolster caseworker services for individual schools. And we do need more now. We need social workers. We need more counselors. We've always needed more. We especially need them more now. New York, expansion of early childhood grades. Programs, not grades, programs. The nation's largest public school system has witnessed a dramatic rise in mental health needs among the coronavirus pandemic. In response, they're launching a training program for parents, paying them $500 each to become wellness ambassadors within their school communities. The plan will pay parent leaders from nearly 950 schools in the neighborhoods most affected by the coronavirus. The mental health initiative is being launched as nearly 51,000 New York City students return to in-person learning starting April 26th. Missouri state using data dashboard to improve teacher recruitment policies. School districts should use data to track and address challenges in teacher recruitment and retention. Set a panel of experts, and that should be going on in every state because that's going to be an issue in every state. The panel spotlighted the approach by Missouri education officials who created a dashboard to overlay student enrollment and teacher assignment data to identify areas of high need or challenge for teachers. The panel concluded that data could be a powerful tool in meeting teacher needs after the pandemic and over time increasing the appeal of the profession. Anything to help. In Vermont, schools strategized the use of $500 million in federal relief funds. Schools and district leaders in Vermont are continuing to work to develop plans to effectively invest hundreds of millions of dollars flowing into school budgets as a result of 3 rounds of federal stimulus money. Jill Briggs Campbell, COVID-19 Federal Emergency Management Funds Manager for the State Education Agency, said that everyone's sort of recognizing that this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity, and as defined by the federal relief legislation, the school funding can be used widely, including on special education services, summer learning programs, mental health supports, and building infrastructure. And again, there's that fire hose, right? It's not those are all wonderful. How will that be carried out effectively? In West Virginia, state education officials urge participation in statewide testing this spring. West Virginia education officials are encouraging students and families to participate in statewide annual testing this spring, detailing measures to take the test, detailing measures taken to test students safely and effectively, and to use resulting data to inform pandemic recovery. In a letter to parents, State Superintendent Clayton Birch wrote, although counties and schools continue to deal with challenges, it is even more critical this year that we obtain data on each of our students to further measure how much the impact the pandemic has had on our students. And so that's similar to Texas, that they are testing despite an outcry not to test, so that we can know how big of a gap do we have. So we are looking forward to getting that data and then continuing to hopefully use that money that's given to do interventions that can be more effective than past ones. Something Texas has done is given us permission to use retired teachers this summer without it impacting their retirement benefits. And I anticipate that that will happen even after this summer. That was a good start, but we will need a lot of people. It's nice having that money, but when you have a limited amount of teachers and bodies in each school, we can't have enough people to small group all of our kids, right? And so being able to bring in retired teachers, sometimes substitutes who are trained to work with kids, and other organizations that have training to help kids pull out of their, to climb the COVID climb, then we need more people. And so that's the big push now, is finding ways to be able to use that money effectively. It's all worth it though. It's all worth it in the end, because those kids are our future. These kids who are currently in our schools are our economic futures. And so making sure that we help them any way we can to move beyond hourly wage jobs when they graduate is our work. And those of you that are listening who aren't teachers, you're not substitutes, but you still want to help, you can mentor, you can volunteer, you can possibly even sign up as a substitute specifically to work with small groups and help kids overcome these gaps. Somehow, we need more people, and if you can help us, we would very much appreciate it, and possibly be able to pay you as well. And that's just not legacy talking, that is every state is going to have that opportunity as they look for people to help them with their small groups. As always, the time goes by fast. I hope that you have heard some interesting things about not only poison control, we thank Cristina Holloway for that, but also the intent and the hope from the Biden administration on how to structure the early childhood infrastructure such that it will lead to a more literate early childhood student. And so, you know, we hope that works. We want that to work, right? And then beyond that, in the older grades as well, and higher ed as well. So again, don't forget, let your legislators, your Congress people know how you feel about all this, because they want to hear from you. Thank you everyone for staying with us. We'll see you again next week.